Long before the first traces of recorded human history, an ancient account from Sumer tells of a time when the world was ruled by 8 extraordinary kings whose combined reign stretched across 241,200 years. This statement does not belong to a legend or a modern fantasy novel, but to one of the oldest surviving written documents known to archaeology, the Sumerian King List. Inscribed in cuneiform on a small baked clay prism, the text describes an era when divine authority, referred to as kingship, was said to have descended from the heavens to earth. According to the tablet, these rulers presided over a sequence of early cities long before the Great Flood that would one day erase their civilization. The notion challenges the familiar narrative that civilization began only 6,000 years ago in Mesopotamia with the invention of writing, organized agriculture, and the rise of city-states. Instead, it hints at a much deeper prelude, one that merges myth and history in a way that continues to puzzle scholars. The artifact that carries this remarkable account was unearthed in 1922 amid the scorched landscape of southern Iraq during an expedition led by the British archaeologist Herbert Weld Blundell at the ruins of Larsa, an ancient Sumerian city. Within the dust of collapsed temples and weathered walls, the team discovered a 4-sided clay prism, each of its surfaces densely inscribed with wedge-shaped symbols. When the text was eventually deciphered, researchers did not find the expected inventory of goods or hymns to the gods, but a carefully ordered list of rulers, their cities, and the durations of their reigns. What startled the translators was not the structure. It read with the precision of an administrative record, but the impossible scale of the numbers. The list begins with the declaration that kingship first settled in the city of Eridu. Its first sovereign, named Alulim, is said to have ruled for 28,800 years. The next, Alalgar, for 36,000, and the third, Enmenluana, for 43,200. The pattern continues through 8 kings ruling in 5 successive cities, each governing for tens of thousands of years, until the scribe totals their reigns at 241,200 years. Then the record breaks off abruptly with a stark sentence. Then the flood swept over. To a modern reader, these time spans are obviously beyond human capability. No biological organism could live or rule for such lengths. Consequently, historians and Assyriologists have long interpreted this section as mythological, an example of how early societies expressed divine legitimacy through exaggerated chronology. In this reading, the vast reigns symbolize the sacred, eternal nature of early kingship rather than literal lifespans. Yet the prism complicates this tidy interpretation. Immediately after the flood, the list resumes in the same unadorned style, now recording new kings and cities whose reigns shrink dramatically from centuries to decades. These later rulers include figures known from independent archaeological and literary sources, such as Gilgamesh of Uruk, whose existence is supported by other inscriptions and whose legendary epic is among the earliest works of world literature. The identical tone used for both the pre-flood and post-flood entries leaves a lingering paradox. If the same scribe, using the same factual voice, documented rulers we now recognize as historical, should the earlier names be dismissed entirely as invention? Scholars remain divided. Some view the list as a chronological bridge connecting mythic origins with historical memory, a kind of political theology that linked kingship to divine order. Others propose that the exaggerated numbers may encode real sequences of dynasties or overlapping lineages from prehistoric settlements, later condensed into a single tradition. Regardless of interpretation, the document stands as an extraordinary testament to how the Sumerians understood time, power, and catastrophe. It presents a world view in which divine authority descends, flourishes for immense spans, and is then swept away by a cosmic deluge, a narrative pattern echoed in many ancient cultures from Mesopotamia to the Mediterranean. The welled Blundell prism itself, preserved today in the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, is modest in appearance, roughly the size of a small book. Yet its implications reach far beyond its physical dimensions. It forces us to reconsider the boundaries between mythology and history, between memory and record. The tablet does not prove that immortal kings once ruled the earth. Rather, it reveals how one of humanity's earliest civilizations conceived its own origins. Through a mixture of divine descent, impossible longevity, and sudden destruction. Modern science provides no evidence that human civilization extends back hundreds of thousands of years, or that a single flood erased all life on Earth. Yet the endurance of this text suggests that the memory of massive floods and vanished cultures left a deep mark on early human imagination. The Sumerian King List therefore occupies a unique space between archaeology and legend, not a straightforward chronicle of factual reigns, but a reflection of how the earliest writers tried to impose order on the vast and mysterious past. In its quiet clay surface lies a record of how humanity first began to measure itself against eternity by turning myth into history and history into myth once again. The Sumerian King List presents the rise of kingship as one continuous sequence, interrupted only by a cataclysmic flood that divided eras of rule. To reject its first half is to treat a unified account as two unrelated stories, preserving only the fragments that fit our modern logic. Yet within that split lies a deeper challenge. What if the list does not describe mythology, but the collective memory of a world long forgotten? The mystery becomes sharper when examined mathematically. The astonishing durations of those early reigns are not arbitrary inventions. They follow a pattern based on the Sumerian base 60 numerical system, a structure that underpinned their astronomy and timekeeping. The Sumerians measured vast cycles of time using a unit called a sar, equal to 3,600 years. When seen through this system, the improbable reigns reveal an intentional design. Alulim's 28,800 years equal 8 sars. Alalgar's 36,000 represent 10 sars, and Menluana's 43,200 correspond to 12. Each reign increases in regular mathematical intervals, suggesting not mythic exaggeration, but deliberate calculation. The scribes responsible for the list were not recording folklore. They were creating a record aligned with a consistent, logical pattern. What they intended to describe remains open to debate. Scholars have long proposed two main interpretations. The conservative explanation is symbolic. These numbers represent cosmic ages or dynastic epochs, each king personifying an entire era rather than an individual life. Yet this explanation leaves an unresolved question. Why, if the figures were purely symbolic, did the scribes name specific rulers and cities as though they had truly existed? The alternative interpretation ventures further into speculation. Perhaps these early sovereigns were not human in the ordinary sense. The list's opening statement, "Kingship descended from heaven," seems to hint at an origin beyond the earth. To the Sumerians, kingship was never a social contract. It was an authority granted from above, a sacred institution bestowed upon humanity by divine or external forces. This concept has inspired a controversial hypothesis among modern researchers that the King List preserves a distorted memory of a time when beings unlike ourselves ruled early human settlements. In ancient Sumerian theology, such beings were known as the Anunnaki, those who came from heaven to earth. In myth, they were intermediaries between the divine and mortal realms, shaping human destiny and teaching civilizations' first arts. The King List, under this lens, might reflect a period when these entities were believed to have governed directly, an age remembered through astronomical symbolism rather than literal governance. The Weld Blundell Prism, where the clearest version of this text survives, is not a unique artifact. Over a dozen additional fragments of the King List have been unearthed across Mesopotamia in cities such as Nippur, Kish, and Uruk, all preserving essentially the same narrative. This repetition demonstrates that it was not fringe mythology, but an accepted chronicle, a framework through which the Sumerians understood their place in history. They envisioned their civilization as the descendant of a divine order that perished in a flood, after which human kings inherited authority in a diminished, mortal form. In this way, the King List became a bridge between heaven and earth, between timeless sovereignty and the fragile dynasties that followed. The document challenges not only chronology, but the philosophical foundation of history itself. It divides existence into two acts: the world before the waters and the world after. Within this framework, humanity's story does not begin with invention, but with inheritance. When the text declares that kingship descended from heaven, it redefines the origin of civilization. Instead of depicting governance as a gradual creation born from necessity, it portrays it as a revelation, a structure imposed from beyond. Modern archaeology and anthropology describe a slow, terrestrial process. Small communities of hunter-gatherers settled near rivers, learned to plant crops, and built permanent dwellings. Over thousands of years, they developed social hierarchies, systems of resource management, and eventually, the machinery of governance. Kingship, in this accepted model, emerged as a human solution to human challenges. The coordination of labor, irrigation, storage, and defense. Yet the Sumerian account proposes the inverse. It asserts that kingship existed first, arriving in its complete form before humanity's organized societies arose. If that is true, even symbolically, it implies that structure preceded substance, that the idea of rule shaped the birth of civilization rather than the other way around. In modern terms, humanity did not develop its own social operating system through trial and adaptation. The system was installed, and human culture evolved within its framework. The first rulers, therefore, were not self-made conquerors or visionary reformers, but appointed custodians, stewards of a divine or cosmic order. Their legitimacy did not depend on conquest or consensus. It originated from a higher principle, from what later ages would call the divine right of kings. This doctrine, that a ruler's authority derives from the will of the gods rather than the will of the people, echoes through centuries of monarchy. Yet its earliest articulation lies within these ancient Sumerian lines. The King List presents that belief not as later justification, but as the foundational truth of governance itself. At its center stands the city of Eridu, named as the first seat of kingship. Archaeological excavations confirm Eridu's antiquity. It is among the earliest known settlements in southern Mesopotamia, its layers dating back to around 5400 BCE. For the Sumerians, Eridu was not merely a place, but the prototype of civilization, the site where divine authority first touched the earth. Temples dedicated to the god Enki, the patron of wisdom and creation, rose there over millennia, rebuilt and expanded through successive generations. Beneath its ruins lies evidence of continuous habitation, suggesting that myth and history converged in this sacred landscape. The notion that kingship descended from heaven thus found tangible form in Eridu's architecture, a spiritual and physical anchor for a worldview in which order flowed from the celestial realm downward. Whether read as sacred allegory or distant memory, the King List reveals the Sumerians' profound attempt to impose coherence on the unfathomable past. It tells of a cosmos where authority was eternal, periodically renewed, and periodically destroyed by cataclysm. In its numbers, we see not a record of impossible lifespans, but an ancient code, a pattern meant to express the rhythm of ages. Through it, the first writers of history sought to answer the same question that still echoes today. Where did the power to rule and the impulse to build civilization truly begin? Beneath the arid plains of southern Mesopotamia lies a city that seemed to emerge already formed, as though civilization itself had taken root overnight. Excavations at Eridu revealed not the rough beginnings of culture, but the layered memory of devotion. Deep under the desert floor, archaeologists uncovered the foundations of an ancient shrine. Over thousands of years, generation after generation rebuilt it, each structure more sophisticated than the one below, forming a vertical record of faith. The people of Eridu did not move their temple elsewhere. They rebuilt again and again on the same sacred ground, as if convinced that this point on earth marked a direct connection between their world and something beyond it. In Sumerian belief, the reason was clear. Eridu was said to be the dwelling of Enki, the deity of wisdom, invention, and creation, the master craftsman of the gods. He was imagined not as a distant figure, but as an ally to humankind, a divine engineer who taught the first arts of civilization. If kingship and the ordered knowledge that came with it were gifts from the heavens, then Enki's city would have been their natural delivery site. From this association arises the most daring interpretation of the ancient phrase, "Kingship descended from heaven." What if the Sumerians were not speaking metaphorically at all? Some researchers have suggested that when the texts describe gods arriving from the sky, they could be recounting encounters with physical beings, entities endowed with extraordinary intelligence and technology far beyond the understanding of early humans. In that speculative reading, the rise of kingship was not an organic social evolution, but a calculated intervention. Perhaps these beings observed humanity in its primitive state, nomadic, fragmented, and without order, and decided to impose a framework for progress. They may have introduced agriculture, engineering, mathematics, and law, not through centuries of trial and error, but by direct instruction. The earliest monarchs, under this theory, would have been administrators of that program, figures standing between worlds, possibly even hybrids, whose mixed nature enabled them to mediate between their celestial mentors and humankind. Such an interpretation remains controversial. Yet it intriguingly aligns with a long-recognized archaeological enigma, often called the Sumerian problem. Civilization in southern Mesopotamia appears almost fully formed around the middle of the 6th millennium BCE. Within an astonishingly brief span, writing, monumental architecture, complex bureaucracy, and a base 60 mathematical system emerged together, along with a grasp of astronomy so precise that modern timekeeping still echoes its divisions. To many scholars, this leap remains difficult to explain through purely gradual development. The notion of knowledge transferred rather than discovered, while extraordinary, offers a coherent framework, a sudden infusion of ideas instead of a slow accumulation. The belief that earthly rulers held authority through a mandate from the heavens is far from unique to Sumer. It resonates through nearly every great civilization that followed. In Egypt, the pharaoh was both sovereign and deity, the living embodiment of Horus and the son of Ra, ruling not by consent, but by divine nature. In China, emperors governed under the Tianming, the mandate of heaven, which could be granted or withdrawn according to moral virtue. In the Hebrew scriptures, kingship is conferred by divine appointment. Figures such as Saul and David are chosen and anointed by the will of God. Across oceans and millennia, the pattern repeats. The Inca emperors traced their descent to the sun god Inti, and Japan's imperial line claimed origin from the sun goddess Amaterasu. In every instance, legitimate power is said to flow downward from the sky, not upward from the people. Whether symbolic or historical, the universality of this idea hints at a common root, a distant event remembered differently by scattered cultures. Could these parallel myths be the refracted memories of an ancient moment when human destiny was shaped by contact with an intelligence beyond our own? The Sumerian King List places this assertion at the very beginning of recorded history. It does not merely imply divine involvement. It declares it outright. According to its opening lines, the age of civilization began not with a human discovery, but with a directive from the heavens. The implications are profound. If taken literally, it would mean that the institutions guiding human society, law, hierarchy, governance, might not have originated from within humanity at all. They would be inheritances from another order of being, embedded in our culture since its inception. Two interpretations remain possible. Either the idea that kingship descended from heaven was the most successful political myth ever conceived, a strategy to legitimize earthly power by cloaking it in divinity, or it records an authentic event, a memory 4,000 years old of a transformative encounter. The text offers its own subtle clue by naming the first recipient of this heavenly command. In the primordial city of Eridu, it says, "The mantle of kingship was bestowed upon a ruler called Alulim." Archaeology confirms that Eridu is among the earliest known urban sites, its deepest layers dating to around 5400 BCE. Whether one reads the account as sacred allegory or as a distorted echo of real events, the story of Alulim marks the point where myth, religion, and early statehood converge. In the quiet ruins of his city, rebuilt temple upon temple, one can sense the beginning of a profound human conviction that power, order, and civilization themselves are gifts that first descended from the stars. With the rise of Alulim, the measure of civilization began. The Sumerian record speaks with striking restraint. No tales of triumph, no hymns of devotion, only a sequence of names, cities, and durations that stretch far beyond human comprehension. Alulim, the first king, ruled for 28,800 years, a span that dwarfs all of recorded history, long enough to contain every human epoch from the construction of the pyramids to the exploration of deep space, repeated several times over. To the modern reader, such a number seems conclusive proof that Alulim is a creature of legend. To the Sumerians, however, it was the number itself that established his authenticity. The figure was not arbitrary, but mathematically perfect. 8 sars, 8 complete cycles of 3,600 years, aligning his reign with the rhythm of the heavens. In their cosmology, this harmony confirmed divine sanction. To grasp what that meant, we must abandon the human sense of time and imagine a ruler whose presence was unbroken across countless generations, unchanging as the landscape itself. For the inhabitants of Eridu, Alulim was not a man, but a constant feature of existence, a being as enduring as the river that sustained their city, and as eternal as the rising sun. His permanence would have defined kingship as something immutable, an institution as old as creation itself. No citizen could doubt the divine origin of power when the throne had remained occupied by the same figure since before memory began. Within this framework, the hypothesis that Alulim was more than human finds fertile ground. If he were not a mortal monarch, but an emissary of the Anunnaki, perhaps a governor or a hybrid being endowed with exceptional longevity, then his 28 millennia reign might not have seemed implausible to those who recorded it. From their viewpoint, it was simple documentation of a reality beyond our biology. When Alulim's rule finally ended, the kingship did not leave Eridu. The list continues with a successor named Alalgar, whose reign extended for 36,000 years, a perfect 10 SARS. Like his predecessor, he left behind no stories, only a name and a number that signifies balance and continuity. His role, it seems, was not to transform, but to preserve, to maintain the cosmic order established before him. Together, these two sovereigns governed from Eridu for 64,800 years. To place that in context, the last great ice age concluded barely 11,700 years ago. If the record were literal, it would mean that the political structure of Eridu endured longer than the entire history of human agriculture. This perspective invites a reassessment of what Eridu truly was. Was it merely an early settlement of mud brick dwellings, or something more deliberate, perhaps even planned? Excavations at its central temple complex reveal peculiar evidence. In the lowest strata, the oldest and most sacred layers, archaeologists found great accumulations of fish bones arranged as offerings. The discovery aligns with Sumerian mythology, which identifies Eridu as the dwelling of Enki, Lord of Wisdom, and of the sweet underground waters known as the Abzu. Enki's emblem was the fish, and his myths tell of beings who emerged from the sea to instruct humanity in the arts of civilization. Among them were the Apkallu, 7 semi-divine sages said to have been sent by Enki before the Great Flood to teach humankind. Texts describe them as possessing both human and aquatic traits, their bodies adorned with scales, half man and half fish. The resemblance between these legends and the earliest rulers of Eridu is striking. Could Alulim and Alalgar be echoes of these Apkallu, remembered not merely as kings, but as civilizing agents from another realm? Such speculation inevitably borders on heresy in conventional archaeology, yet it offers a provocative unification of myth and artifact. If one were to imagine Eridu not simply as the first city, but as a command post, an outpost established by visitors who guided early humanity, the choice of location would make perfect sense. Positioned on the marshy edge of the Persian Gulf, the site granted access to abundant water, fertile plains, and routes inland toward future centers of power. From there, a network of cities could have radiated outward, carrying with it the architecture, mathematics, and religious frameworks that would define Mesopotamian civilization. Whether interpreted as divine revelation, extraterrestrial intervention, or the poetic memory of cultural revolution, the story of Eridu stands as the axis around which the earliest concept of kingship turns. It is the place where the temporal meets the eternal, where myth first takes the form of record, and where humanity's long experiment with organized power begins. If the extraordinary reigns of Alulim and Alulgar represented an initial phase of cosmic supervision, then their epoch marked the first stable era of an otherworldly enterprise, the formative period in which humanity was guided under direct observation. In this interpretation, Eridu was not a mythical garden, but the prototype of Eden itself, a designed habitat, a controlled cradle where civilization was seeded and nurtured under the gaze of its unseen architects. When the Sumerian King List records that after Alulgar's reign, the kingship was removed from Eridu and established in Bad Tibira, the event reads less like a downfall than a calculated transition. The command center shifted. The project entered its next stage. The very name of the new capital offers a clue. Bad Tibira translates to Wall of the Coppersmiths, or Fortress of the Metalworkers, revealing a decisive turn in focus. The locus of divine-human interaction was moving from the watery sanctuary of Enki, the realm of creation and wisdom, to a place devoted to metallurgy, fire, and transformation. The philosophical age of the temple was giving way to the mechanical age of the forge. Yet the legacy of Eridu endured. Its first rulers, enigmatic and nameless indeed, but monumental in duration, established the pattern. They were the beginning and the foundation of civilization, the architects of continuity who ensured that the machinery of kingship remained unbroken. Their measured spans of time, impossibly vast yet mathematically exact, suggested a power and a chronology that transcended human origin. They were gardeners tending the first soil of social order, preparing it for the age to come. The relocation of kingship thus symbolized a new mission. What had begun as a period of conceptual creation now entered a material phase. Bad Tibira, the stronghold of smiths, embodied an awakening of industry. The first monarch of this second stage was Enmenluana, whose reign, according to the Prism, extended 43,200 years, exactly 12 SARs. This precision is not coincidental. Across ancient cosmologies, 12 signified completion and universal harmony. 12 months in a year, 12 constellations of the zodiac, 12 gates of the heavens. Enmenluana's reign represented a perfect cycle, a balance between cosmic law and terrestrial power. In his era, divine authority manifested through matter. To the ancients, metalwork was not craftsmanship, but alchemy, the recreation of divine processes through human hands. The act of extracting dull ore from the earth, purifying it in fire, and shaping it into instruments of beauty or war was an imitation of creation itself. The transformation of earth into light mirrored the transformation of chaos into order. Within this worldview, Bad Tabira was not merely an urban center. It was the forge of civilization, a holy foundry where the divine element of fire met human labor. The city's very purpose aligned with theories proposed by modern speculative researchers such as Zecharia Sitchin, who suggested that the Anunnaki came to Earth in search of precious metals, most notably gold, needed to restore the atmosphere of their distant homeworld, Nibiru. In this interpretation, Bad Tabira was not simply a royal seat, but an industrial complex of staggering scale, its furnaces blazing for millennia under extraterrestrial supervision. Enmenluana, rather than a mythic figure, becomes the site administrator of this planetary enterprise, directing extraction and refinement for more than 40 millennia. When his cosmic cycle concluded, kingship remained within the city of fire, transferring to his successor, Enmengalana, whose reign lasted 28,800 years, 8 SARS. The same duration attributed to Alulim, the first king of Eridu. Such repetition is deliberate, signaling the completion of one grand phase and the rebirth of another. The age of the forge had achieved its goal. Humanity had learned to command the elements. The next step was to organize the mind and spirit of civilization. Enmengalana's reign, therefore, is traditionally associated with the codification of divine order, the emergence of a system that governed not metals, but morals. His legacy corresponds to one of the most intriguing and abstract ideas in Sumerian thought, the concept of the me, sacred decrees that embodied the blueprint of all civilized life. The me were understood both as divine laws and as physical tokens, perhaps inscribed tablets or crystalline artifacts, each containing the formula for a specific aspect of existence. There was a me for kingship, for priesthood, for truth and justice, others for writing, weaving, and music, even for paradoxical qualities such as deceit or desire. Each me defined how its principle functioned in the world, forming what we might call the operating system of civilization. Within this symbolic framework, Enmengalana presided over the distribution and enforcement of these decrees, ensuring that human society would mirror divine order. What had begun in Eridu as the birth of kingship and continued in Bad Tibira as the mastery of matter now evolved into the regulation of consciousness itself. The experiment was no longer just about survival or industry. It was about identity, the programming of a species to function within the parameters of divine architecture. Whether one views this as allegory or as the encoded memory of an ancient intervention, the narrative carries a profound implication. Civilization, according to this vision, unfolded through deliberate phases: creation, material mastery, and moral structure, each governed by a different center, each ruled by beings whose timescales dwarfed human comprehension. Eridu built the spirit, Bad Tibira forged the world, and through them both, the pulse of humanity began to align with the rhythm of the stars. In Sumerian tradition, the sacred me, those divine decrees that defined the laws of existence, were said to belong to Enki, the god of wisdom and creation, who guarded them in his temple at Eridu. They were the essence of civilization itself, tangible symbols of order and knowledge, secured within the city where humanity was first taught to think, build, and govern. The reign of Enmengalana appears to represent the era when these principles were systematically distributed, woven into the structure of daily life, and encoded into the institutions of the new capital at Bad Tibira. He was portrayed as a custodian of divine equilibrium, ensuring that the immense industrial power unleashed in the city of the forge remained guided by moral and cosmic law. Within a speculative Anunnaki interpretation, the ME could be envisioned as a kind of celestial archive, an ancient repository of encoded instructions, a comprehensive data system designed to regulate every facet of human society. To the initiates of this worldview, Enmengalana was not merely a monarch, but the appointed administrator of this program, maintaining the flow of information and authority so that humanity's growing workforce remained stable, efficient, and under control. After these two vast and ordered reigns, the story of Bad Tibira takes an abrupt and profoundly human turn. The final ruler to hold the throne there was Dumuzid, whose reign is recorded as 36,000 years, 10 complete sars. Yet unlike his silent predecessors, Dumuzid does not remain confined to the stark precision of the King List. He steps out of the clay record and into the mythic imagination of the ancient world. Remembered as Dumuzid the Shepherd, he becomes the central figure in one of history's most enduring archetypes, the god who dies and returns. His tale, preserved in Sumerian hymns and elegies, unfolds as a divine tragedy. Dumuzid was beloved by the goddess Inanna, the radiant queen of heaven, later known to the Akkadians as Ishtar. When Inanna descended into the underworld and was ensnared by its rulers, her release required a substitute to take her place. The demons who served the underworld found Dumuzid and seized him. Despite his pleas and attempts to escape, he was dragged into the depths of darkness. His death cast a shadow over the world. Fertility ceased, rivers dried, and grief consumed the land. Overcome with sorrow, Inanna bargained for his partial return. For half the year, he would rise from the underworld, restoring life and abundance to the fields. For the other half, he would descend again, bringing drought and desolation. Thus, through Dumuzid, the Sumerians gave divine form to the eternal rhythm of death and renewal that governed their world. In him, they saw the prototype for all later dying and resurrected gods: Osiris in Egypt, Tammuz in Babylon, Adonis in Greece, and Mithras in Rome. Even the later image of a divine shepherd who sacrifices himself and returns to bring salvation to humankind carries the echo of Dumuzid's lament, first sung thousands of years before. His myth bridges the human and the cosmic, the agricultural and the spiritual. Yet his appearance on the King List presents a riddle. How could a ruler said to have lived before the Great Flood, reigning for 36,000 years, also be remembered as a mortal god of love, loss, and resurrection? Was Dumuzid an actual sovereign whose tragic death became a seasonal allegory? Or was he a mythic figure later inserted into the record to bestow divine ancestry upon the ancient kings? To the Sumerian scribes, this distinction was irrelevant. For them, history and mythology were threads of the same tapestry. Dumuzid was both king and god, both a man of an antediluvian age and a celestial presence whose drama was replayed in the cycle of the seasons. His reign marked the closing chapter of Bad Tibera, the era of fire, passion, and transformation. With his passing, the King List declares that kingship was transferred once more, this time to a city called Larak, a place that has never been found. The mention of Larak introduces one of the most tantalizing mysteries in Sumerian geography. Unlike Eridu or Bad Tibera, its remains have never been identified, despite extensive archaeological work across Iraq. It exists only as a name carved in clay, a spectral capital belonging to an invisible kingdom. Scholars have speculated that the city may have been completely destroyed in the flood, or that its identity was concealed for religious or political reasons. Others imagine it as something beyond an ordinary city, perhaps a hidden command post, a sanctuary of judgment, or a center of celestial science. Whatever its nature, Larak becomes a symbolic threshold, representing both continuity and concealment in the unfolding story of divine rule. The sole king recorded to have governed from this unseen city was Ensi-Padzidana, whose reign lasted 28,800 years, another precise cycle of 8 sars. The repetition of this number, shared with Alulim, the first king of Eridu, and Enmengalana, the lawgiver of Bad Tibira, implies restoration and symmetry, a return to cosmic balance after Dumuzid's passionate disruption. Later, Sumerian traditions associate Larak with the god Ninurta, the warrior son of Enlil, who embodied both destruction and renewal. He was the storm bringer and the farmer, the healer who wielded the flood as both punishment and blessing. In this dual nature lies the probable essence of Ensi-Padzidana's rule, the maintenance of planetary equilibrium, the calibration of chaos and order, drought and abundance. Within the speculative Anunnaki framework, his era might represent a phase of environmental stewardship, a period of planetary management following the upheavals of creation and industrialization. Larak, then, becomes the symbol of a world overseen, adjusted, and stabilized, the hidden control center ensuring that Earth remained a functioning system within the greater cosmic design. After countless millennia of industrial expansion in Bad Tibira, the Earth itself may have required an era of restoration, a long epoch of recalibration after the fires of the Forge. The reign of Ensi-Padzidana, ruling from his hidden capital, appears to represent that phase. He governed, according to the ancient record, for nearly 30,000 years, an age defined not by conquest, but by quiet regulation. Within the mythic framework, he could be envisioned as a divine steward, a guardian of balance who maintained the climate, the rivers, and the fertility of the land that sustained humanity. The obscurity of his name and the invisibility of his city would have been fitting for such a task. If the earlier rulers embodied creation, knowledge, and transformation, Ensi-Padzidana represented preservation, the invisible hand ensuring that the great experiment of civilization remained in harmony with its environment. When his reign ended, the King List notes a final transfer of power. Kingship, the sacred institution that had descended from the heavens, moved to a new and final capital, Sippar. Unlike the ghostly Larak, Sippar is a real and excavated city, its ruins lying on the banks of the Euphrates. In antiquity, it was one of the most renowned centers of solar worship, devoted to the god Utu, known later to the Babylonians as Shamash. Utu was the all-seeing eye of heaven, the god of light, truth, and justice. From his vantage in the sky, he was believed to witness every act committed beneath the sun, making him the supreme arbiter of divine law. It was in this radiant city of the sun that one of the most enigmatic rulers of the antediluvian era ascended the throne, Enmendarana. His reign, recorded as 21,000 years, spanned almost 6 sars, shorter than those of his predecessors, yet his legacy looms larger than any before him. Later Mesopotamian texts recount that Enmendarana was summoned into the heavens by Utu and Adad, the storm god. There, seated upon a golden throne, he was taught the secret architecture of the cosmos, the arts of divination, the reading of omens in oil and water, and the ancient practice of hepatoscopy, interpreting the signs found in the liver of sacrificial animals. In the symbolic language of Sumer, this was the transfer of divine knowledge, the initiation of a mortal into the mysteries of the gods. When his celestial education was complete, Enmendarana was returned to earth, charged with founding the priestly class and instructing them in the sacred sciences that would preserve this wisdom for generations. His story finds an uncanny reflection in a later tradition, the biblical account of Enoch. The book of Genesis states that Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. Like Enmendarana, Enoch was not said to have died, but to have ascended, entering the realm of the divine and returning transformed. Both figures mark the boundary between human kingship and heavenly mentorship, the moment when the line between mortal and divine dissolves. For modern interpreters, the tale of Enmendarana represents the most explicit description of knowledge transfer between gods and men. The mysteries of astronomy, mathematics, and predictive ritual that he brought back to Sipar were not discoveries of human invention, but revelations bestowed from above. In speculative frameworks, this ascent has been reimagined as a literal event, the transport of a chosen emissary aboard a celestial vessel, taken beyond Earth to be trained in the sciences of the cosmos, and returned as a prophet king. His reign in the city of the sun, stretching over 21 millennia, thus becomes the age in which divine knowledge was codified and distributed, the foundation for Mesopotamia's priestly and scientific traditions. The pattern of civilization's progression, as described in the King List, now approached its end. The great experiment was nearing completion. Kingship moved one final time, settling in the last of the 5 pre-flood capitals, Shuruppak. Archaeology confirms Shuruppak as a historical city, a thriving settlement in the late 4th millennium BCE, revered in Sumerian tradition as a place of wisdom and learning. The King List attributes to its final ruler, Ubara Tutu, a reign of 18,600 years, the shortest of all the antediluvian kings. This shrinking of time, like the quickening pulse before catastrophe, foreshadows the end of an era. The text remains silent on his actions, but his significance reverberates across myth. Ubaratutu's legacy survives through his son, known in other writings as Utnapishtim, the Sumerian counterpart of Noah. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, Utnapishtim recounts how the gods resolved to destroy humanity with a deluge. Enlil, enraged by human clamor, decreed annihilation. But Enki, the same god who had once bestowed kingship upon Eridu, defied the divine council. In secret, he warned Utnapishtim of the coming flood, instructing him to dismantle his house and build a vast boat, a perfect cube in shape, to preserve his family and the seed of every living thing. When the waters came, they erased the old world, ending the reigns of the ancient kings and sweeping away the cities that had endured for more than 240 millennia. Ubaratutu's time on the throne thus marks the final calm before annihilation, the last measured heartbeat before the world's reset. He was the ruler of twilight, the custodian of humanity's final days before the deluge. His son became the bridge between worlds, the single thread that carried the wisdom, art, and memory of the antediluvian age into the reborn world that followed. When the flood narrative intersects with the King List, myth and history fuse with chilling precision. After recording an unbroken sequence of rulers and reigns spanning 241,200 years, the scribe ends with a single, unembellished statement. Then the flood swept over. No poetry, no justification, no lamentation. The sentence stands like a stone boundary marking the edge of time. On one side lies the era of divine kings, beings whose lives and powers exceeded human limits. On the other, the age of mortals, when the gods withdrew, and history, as we know it, began. The simplicity of the phrase belies its enormity. It is the moment when eternity fractures into time, when myth gives way to memory, and the first civilization fades beneath the rising waters. On one side of that line lay the age of divine kings, on the other, a drowned world, and the fragile dawn of a diminished humanity. The Great Flood was not merely a tale from Sumer. It was, and remains, humanity's most enduring and universal memory. Versions of the same story appear across continents and millennia, often with astonishingly similar detail, told by peoples who could never have known one another. In Mesopotamia, it was recorded in the Epic of Gilgamesh, where Utnapishtim recounts a storm so violent that even the gods trembled in terror. In the Hebrew scriptures, God commands Noah to construct an ark to preserve life through waters that would rise above the highest mountains. In Greece, Deucalion and Pyrrha survive a flood sent by Zeus by clinging to a wooden chest. In India, the sage Manu is warned by the god Vishnu, disguised as a fish, to build a great vessel to endure the deluge. The same theme ripples outward, from the Aztec accounts of a watery apocalypse to the Aboriginal stories of a great inundation. From Norse legends of drowned worlds to Native American traditions of chosen survivors. Everywhere, humanity remembers the same event, an ocean rising against the world, sparing only a few to begin again. For centuries, historians regarded these narratives as metaphors, reflections of local river floods told and retold by agricultural societies, living under constant threat from the waters that sustained them. Yet their global persistence, their consistent structure, and the deep antiquity of their imagery hint at something far greater, a possible collective memory of a real and catastrophic event that reshaped the Earth. Geological evidence provides a compelling context. Around 12,800 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, the planet entered a period of abrupt and severe cooling known as the Younger Dryas. The Earth, which had been slowly warming, was thrust back into near glacial conditions within decades. The cause remains debated, but one hypothesis dominates discussion: the Younger Dryas impact theory. It proposes that one or more comets struck the vast ice sheets of North America, generating enough heat to vaporize enormous volumes of ice while destabilizing the entire glacial system. The ensuing collapse unleashed torrents of meltwater into the world's oceans, causing sudden sea level rise, colossal tsunamis, and floods of unimaginable scale. To any civilization living along the coasts or river deltas of that age, it would have been the end of the world. The impact hypothesis provides a scientifically plausible foundation for the myth of a global flood, an ancient trauma written not only in story, but in stone. Archaeology adds another layer of confirmation. Excavations at Shurapak, the last of the Sumerian pre-flood capitals, revealed a uniform deposit of river silt nearly 3 meters thick, dating to around 2900 BCE. This layer separates older strata from younger, indicating that a catastrophic flood once interrupted the city's history. Though regional rather than global, such an event could easily have fused with humanity's far older memory of global catastrophe, merging geology and myth into a single, enduring narrative. Yet the Sumerian King List presents the flood as more than disaster. It marks a metaphysical divide. Before the deluge, kings lived for tens of thousands of years. Afterward, their reigns shrank to centuries, and then to the brief lifespans of mortal men. It was as though the flood had stripped the world of a vital essence, a divine longevity or genetic stability, reducing gods to humans. The biblical account echoes this transformation. Before the flood, patriarchs such as Methuselah are said to have lived nearly 1,000 years. Afterward, in the book of Genesis, God limits human life to 120 years, declaring, "My spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is mortal." Both traditions describe the same boundary, the deliberate curtailing of humanity's lifespan, the recalibration of creation itself. Within the framework of the Anunnaki hypothesis, the flood acquires a darker dimension. Was it truly a natural event, or the result of deliberate intervention? Some researchers propose that the Anunnaki, if they were indeed advanced beings overseeing Earth, initiated the cataclysm themselves. Using technology capable of destabilizing polar ice or manipulating planetary systems, they may have triggered a controlled purge, a reset of civilization. In this reading, the flood was not divine punishment, but population management on a cosmic scale. Humanity, perhaps growing rebellious or genetically unstable, had outlived its intended purpose. The deluge became a means to erase the failed iteration and begin anew. Within this version of events, Enki's secret warning to Utnapishtim becomes an act of rebellion, a scientist defying his superiors to preserve the species he helped design. The Ark, then, was not only a vessel of survival, but an archive carrying genetic material, knowledge, and memory through a planned extinction. The survivors were not random, but selected. Individuals chosen for their adaptability and obedience, rebuilt to live shorter, more controllable lives. Such interpretations push the story beyond theology into a haunting allegory of control, creation, and erasure. Whether viewed as divine justice, cosmic engineering, or the trauma of natural catastrophe, the flood serves as the great filter of human memory. It divides the impossible from the historical, the immortal from the mortal. It is the point at which myth becomes archaeology and the superhuman becomes human. From that moment, the rulers of Earth were no longer beings of unending life, but kings who would live and die as men. The prism's closing words, "Then the flood swept over," stand as both epitaph and genesis. With those 4 simple words, an age of 241,200 years ends in silence. The world of the gods disappears beneath the waters, and from the silted ruins, a lesser species rises to rebuild, destined to forget what came before, yet forever haunted by its memory. The Great Flood left a scar that runs through the collective memory of our species, a haunting imprint of the moment when everything familiar was erased. When the waters finally withdrew, they revealed a planet stripped bare, a blank canvas awaiting the first strokes of a new civilization. Yet the world that emerged was smaller, quieter, and somehow severed from its celestial origin. The direct thread connecting Earth to the heavens seemed to have been cut. Humanity stood alone for the first time, tasked with rebuilding from the mud and remembering what had been lost. The Sumerian King List records this rebirth with the same calm precision it used to describe the age before. After the flood had swept over and kingship had descended from heaven, the kingship was in Kish. With those words, a new era begins. The age of divine monarchs, whose reigns spanned tens of thousands of years, was gone. The world now belonged to men. In this post-Diluvian age, the rulers of Kish are mortal, though their reigns, 960 years, 840, 300, still stretch beyond normal comprehension. Compared to the vast epochs of the antediluvian kings, these numbers mark an extraordinary contraction. Time itself seems to have tightened, history compressing as humanity settled into its new rhythm. As the list continues, the reigns diminish further until they resemble the familiar span of human lives. 20 years, 30, 40. The divine has retreated, and mortality has become the measure of kingship. It is within this more grounded human landscape that we encounter the figure who unites myth and history, the fifth king of Uruk, Gilgamesh. His entry on the prism is spare. The divine Gilgamesh, whose reign was 126 years. Yet unlike the silent, distant rulers of earlier epochs, Gilgamesh steps out of the clay and into legend fully alive. He is no mere name. He is the hero of the Epic of Gilgamesh, the earliest great work of literature known to humanity, written more than 15 centuries before Homer's Iliad. His story, assembled from broken tablets of cuneiform, reveals a king of extraordinary power and arrogance, a demigod born 2/3 divine and 1/3 human, who ruled Uruk with both brilliance and cruelty. To temper his pride, the gods create Enkidu, a wild man from the wilderness. First his adversary, then his companion. Enkidu becomes Gilgamesh's mirror and his heart. Together, they embark on adventures that define the boundaries between gods and men, slaying the monster Humbaba, killing the bull of heaven, defying fate itself. But when Enkidu dies as punishment for their defiance, Gilgamesh's confidence collapses. For the first time, he confronts the reality of death. In that moment of grief begins one of the most profound transitions in world storytelling. Gilgamesh, unwilling to accept mortality, sets out to find the only man who has escaped it, Utnapishtim, the survivor of the Great Flood. His journey to the ends of the earth is both literal and spiritual, a bridge between the two halves of the King List, the immortal and the mortal, the world before and the world after. At last he reaches the ancient sage, who tells him the full story of the deluge, how the gods resolved to destroy humanity, how Enki broke the divine command and revealed the secret, how the ark was built, the storm unleashed, the mountain found, and how Utnapishtim and his wife were granted eternal life as the last of the old world. Through Utnapishtim, the epic confirms what the King List only implies, that the flood was not myth, but memory. To the Sumerians, it was an event that had reshaped both Earth and humanity. Utnapishtim is living proof, the direct voice of an antediluvian age speaking into the new. Yet when Gilgamesh pleads for the same gift of immortality, Utnapishtim denies him. The favor of the gods, he says, was bestowed once and will never be repeated. The life you seek, you will not find, he tells the king. When the gods created man, they kept immortality for themselves. In that moment, the cosmic hierarchy is sealed. The gods remain eternal. Mankind is bound to time. Gilgamesh returns to Uruk defeated but transformed, realizing that only through deeds and legacy can a human name endure. The walls he builds around his city, the wisdom he imparts, these become his immortality. In him, the myth of the God King gives way to the story of the mortal hero. And with that transformation, the divine epic yields fully to history. For centuries, scholars assumed Gilgamesh was entirely fictional, a poetic invention like Hercules or King Arthur, but archaeology gradually began to uncover the truth. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, excavations in southern Iraq revealed the vast ruins of Uruk, the very city described in the epic. Archaeologists unearthed its colossal walls, stretching more than 9 kilometers, and clay inscriptions naming rulers from Gilgamesh's dynasty. Among them, his own name appeared in administrative tablets and king lists that predate later mythic retellings. The evidence was clear. Gilgamesh had lived. He was both legend and man, the echo of a real sovereign, whose reign was later magnified into epic grandeur. That discovery transformed the Sumerian King List from a relic of myth into a bridge between imagination and archaeology. Gilgamesh stands at the hinge of history, the living proof that myth preserves memory, and that the world remade by the flood still carried within it the shadow of the divine. In him, the immortal past and the mortal present finally converge. Gilgamesh stands as the anchor point, the figure that moors the seemingly mythic first half of the Sumerian King List to the verifiable history of the second. His existence transforms the document from a mythological chronicle into something far more complex, a record where the divine and the historical coexist within the same script. The scribe who inscribed Gilgamesh's reign of 126 years was the same who recorded Alulim's reign of 28,800. To that ancient hand, both were part of the same continuum. The text makes no distinction between them. For the Sumerians, the age of gods and the age of men were not separate epochs, but successive chapters of a single story. Gilgamesh's lineage, a being described as 2/3 divine and 1/3 mortal, becomes the living symbol of that transition. Scholars often interpret his part divine nature as metaphorical, a poetic exaggeration of his strength and authority. But another reading lingers beneath the surface. What if this description preserves a literal memory, an echo of the genetic mingling between the Anunnaki and early humanity? If so, Gilgamesh could represent the final generation touched by that ancient hybridization, his diluted divinity marking the closing of a program that once bridged heaven and earth. His obsessive quest for immortality would then carry an added meaning, not merely the universal human longing to escape death, but a literal attempt to reclaim the longevity that was once a birthright of his ancestors. His failure, his return to Uruk as a mortal who must find meaning in legacy rather than eternity, symbolizes the final severing of that link. After him, the divine spark fades. The kings who follow are fully human, their lives finite, their power bound by the limits of time. Gilgamesh stands forever on the threshold between worlds, 1 foot planted in the realm of gods, the other in the dust of men. The narrative preserved by the King List of an age of immense lifespans, destroyed by flood, giving way to a diminished world, would be remarkable enough if confined to Mesopotamia. But it is not. The same triadic pattern, a golden age of longevity, a cosmic catastrophe, and a rebirth into a shorter-lived mortal existence, echoes through the foundational myths of civilizations across the globe. It is as though fragments of a single memory were carried on multiple arcs, scattered among the survivors, and later transcribed in different tongues and forms. The most striking parallel lies in the opening chapters of the Hebrew Bible. There, the genealogy from Adam to Noah mirrors the antediluvian kings of Sumer, almost point for point. Adam is said to have lived 930 years, his son Seth 912, his grandson Enosh 905. The pattern continues for 10 generations, culminating in Methuselah, the longest-lived of them all, who reaches 969 years. While these numbers are counted in centuries rather than the Sumerian millennia, the underlying motif is identical. Before the flood, humanity lived for extraordinary spans of time. The correspondence deepens further. The Hebrew Enoch, who walked with God and was not, for God took him, is a near-perfect counterpart to the Sumerian Enmendurana of Sippar, who ascended into heaven and returned with divine knowledge. Then, as in the Sumerian record, the flood arrives. Noah's Ark replaces Ziusudra's boat, or Utnapishtim's cube-shaped vessel. But the story remains the same. Divine anger, secret warning, the preservation of life, and the rebirth of the world. Afterward, lifespans collapse. Abraham lives 175 years. Moses, 120. And by the age of King David, the psalmist declares that 70 years are the measure of a man. The pattern precisely mirrors the King List: the Golden Age, the Deluge, and the Decline. For centuries, scholars have dismissed these parallels as literary borrowing, evidence that the Hebrew scribes absorbed Mesopotamian myths during their exile in Babylon in the 6th century BCE. Yet the similarity is too deep, too structural, to be mere imitation. What if both traditions drew not from each other, but from a shared primordial source, a collective memory inherited from survivors of a real cataclysm, passed down through separate lineages and languages? The echo extends far beyond Mesopotamia. In Egypt, the historian Manetho, writing in the 3rd century BCE, recorded a sequence of divine and semi-divine rulers who governed the land for thousands of years before the first human pharaoh. Menes, the Turin King papyrus, though fragmentary, preserves the same vision. Dynasties of gods reigning for impossibly long epochs, succeeded by mortal kings. Egypt, too, remembered a lost era when gods walked among men, and time itself moved differently. The rhythm repeats with haunting regularity across the ancient world. In India, the Hindu cosmological cycle divides time into 4 vast ages, or yugas. The first, the Satya Yuga, is a golden epoch when humanity is virtuous, immense in stature, and endowed with lives lasting 100,000 years. Each successive age sees a gradual decline in moral purity, in physical size, in lifespan, culminating in the present era, the Kali Yuga, an age of conflict, ignorance, and brevity. The same sequence unfolds again: perfection, destruction, diminution. The pattern is so widespread that it defies coincidence. It suggests not the diffusion of a single myth, but the survival of a universal memory, the recollection of a world that once was, shattered by disaster and reborn in lesser form. Gilgamesh, poised at the intersection of these echoes, becomes the symbolic link between them all. He is the hinge of history, the living bridge that binds the divine past to the human present. Through him, the Sumerian King List ceases to be a relic of fantasy and becomes a map of collective remembrance, a chronicle of humanity's long descent from the age of the gods to the age of men. Across the ancient world, from the valleys of the Nile to the steppes of China, echoes of the same origin story resound. In early Chinese chronicles, the dawn of civilization begins under the rule of sage kings and divine emperors, luminaries who brought order, agriculture, and law, and who reigned for centuries. The Yellow Emperor, the father of Chinese culture, was said to have lived and ruled for 100 years. His reign defined by invention and enlightenment. Such accounts mirror a recurring global pattern, the memory of a time when rulers were more than human, and life itself stretched across ages. What are we to make of this astonishing consensus? Is it merely humanity's universal nostalgia for a lost golden age, a shared instinct to project greatness backward into myth? Or could it represent a true, species-wide recollection, an encoded memory of an age that preceded recorded history, preserved in the amber of legend? If it is memory, then the Sumerian King List stands as its most meticulous surviving record, a document where myth reads like mathematics. Its tone is not poetic, but administrative. It itemizes names, cities, and durations with the precision of a census. Such formality implies that the civilization it describes before the flood was not a regional anomaly, but perhaps a planetary system of governance, a global order remembered as kingship descending from heaven. Within that framework, the Great Flood becomes not simply a natural disaster, but an event that shattered a unified world, scattering its survivors across continents and plunging them into isolation. Each remnant culture would then preserve fragments of the original story, divergent mythologies orbiting a shared ancestral truth. The gods of Olympus, the Devas of India, the Elohim of the Hebrews, and the Anunnaki of Sumer may all be linguistic masks for the same ancient hierarchy of powerful, long-lived beings who once ruled the earth. Under this hypothesis, the King List represents the most complete and uncorrupted master file of that forgotten age, a surviving fragment of the original record from which the world's myths later diverged. It lists names, dates, and places with a precision that myth alone rarely attempts, offering not metaphor, but measurement. Yet its numbers and claims defy modern understanding. traditional scholars explain the vast reigns of the pre-flood kings as purely symbolic, allegories of divine perfection. Others dismiss the entire antediluvian section as theological myth. But such explanations often feel like evasions, interpretations that comfort the interpreter rather than confront the evidence. The King List resists dismissal through its very structure. The reigns are not random exaggerations. They conform to a deliberate numerical system, a pattern so exact it demands to be addressed. In the 20th century, one independent researcher attempted to do just that. In the 1970s, Zecharia Sitchin, a maverick linguist trained in ancient Semitic languages, proposed a theory that reframed the origins of humanity itself. To him, the Sumerian King List was not a mythological document, but a redacted historical record, an account of an extraterrestrial intervention written in bureaucratic form. Sitchin's key insight began with astronomy. The Sumerians, he noted, recognized the sun, moon, and 5 visible planets, accurately tracking their movements. Yet their texts also spoke of a 12th celestial body, counting the sun and moon as members of the system. This was Nibiru, the planet of the crossing, a massive world on a long, elliptical orbit that passed through the inner solar system once every 3,600 Earth years before vanishing again into deep space. That number, 3,600, was not arbitrary. It matched exactly the Sumerian unit of time known as the Sar, the same measure used to calculate the reigns of the antediluvian kings. According to Sitchin, this was no coincidence. The reigns of 28,800 years, 8 Sars, or 43,200 years, 12 Sars, were not symbolic lengths of human time at all, but literal counts of Nibiru's orbital cycles. The Sumerian scribes, he argued, were not recording reigns in Earth years, but in the timekeeping system of the gods themselves. This realization, Sitchin claimed, unlocked the entire code of ancient myth. The beings who ruled before the flood were not imaginary deities, but extraterrestrial visitors, inhabitants of Nibiru, known to the Sumerians as the Anunnaki, those who from heaven to earth came. Their descent, recorded as the moment kingship came down from heaven, marked the establishment of civilization on earth. But why had they come? Sitchin's answer was not conquest or curiosity, but necessity. According to his reading, their planet was dying, its atmosphere failing, and they turned to Earth to mine a resource that could restore it. Gold. To them, gold was not currency, but salvation, a material essential for repairing their world's protective shield. The mines, the temples, the early cities, all were part of this operation. Humanity, created or adapted as a labor force, inherited both the knowledge and the servitude of its makers. Whether one accepts Sitchin's vision or not, his theory forced scholars and readers alike to confront the King List anew, not as fantasy, but as a puzzle that continues to blur the boundary between history and myth, science and scripture, heaven and earth. According to Zecharia Sitchin's interpretation, the story of humanity's beginnings did not unfold in Eden, but on a distant world whose atmosphere was failing. Nibiru, home of the Anunnaki, faced a slow planetary death as its protective shield disintegrated. Its scientists discovered that dispersing microscopic particles of gold into the upper atmosphere could restore stability and preserve their civilization. But Nibiru lacked the necessary gold reserves. There was, however, one planet along its vast elliptical orbit that was rich in it: Earth. Around 450,000 years ago, Sitchin claimed, the Anunnaki launched a colonial expedition to this younger world. They did not arrive as deities, but as laborers, miners seeking to save their own planet. Their first settlement was established in the Mesopotamian basin, a place they called Edin, home of the righteous ones, where they began the painstaking work of extracting gold from riverbeds and rock. In Sitchin's reading, this marks the shift in the Sumerian King List from the sacred city of Eridu to the industrial hub of Bad Tibira, fortress of the metalworkers. What ancient scribes recorded as the movement of divine kings was, in this view, the administrative relocation of a colonial mining operation. Over time, the physical demands of labor provoked dissent. The lower-ranking Anunnaki, exhausted by centuries of toil, mutinied. Faced with rebellion, their leaders, two brilliant genetic scientists, Enki and Ninhursag, conceived an audacious plan. They would create a new labor force, a species designed for obedience and endurance. They began not from nothing, but with what evolution had already provided: Homo erectus, Earth's most advanced primate. Using their own genetic material, they spliced Anunnaki DNA into the existing genome, fertilizing the hybrid embryo through an artificial process and implanting it in an Anunnaki surrogate. The result was a new being, Adamu, the Earthling, the prototype of Homo sapiens. In this interpretation, humanity was not created in the image of gods, but engineered as a workforce. The Sumerian King List, then, becomes the bureaucratic record of this vast planetary enterprise. The antediluvian kings, Alulim, Alalgar, Enmenluana, and their successors, were not mythic figures, but Anunnaki overseers. Their reigns measured not in human years, but in Nibiruan long years. The phrase kingship descended from heaven referred literally to their arrival from space and the establishment of their governing hierarchy on Earth. The Great Flood, in Sitchin's reconstruction, was not a moral punishment, but a predictable celestial event. Each time Nibiru passed through the inner solar system, its gravitational force disrupted Earth's poles, triggering cataclysmic displacements of the Antarctic ice sheet and planetary floods. During one such cycle, Enlil, the mission's commander, chose to let the disaster cleanse Earth of what he saw as an unruly experiment. Enki, however, defied the order, warning his human son, Utnapishtim, to build a vessel to preserve life. When the waters receded, most of the Anunnaki returned to their homeworld, leaving behind a hybrid population guided by descendants of mixed bloodlines. Among them, according to this interpretation, was Gilgamesh, the 2/3 divine king of Uruk, an echo of the celestial ancestry, diluted but not extinguished. To academic historians, Sitchin's hypothesis is pseudo-archaeology built on speculative translation and flawed astronomy. No verified evidence of a 12th planet has ever been found. Yet his theory remains captivating because it unifies so many mysteries under a single grand narrative. The Sumerian King List's impossible numbers, the sudden rise of civilization, the global flood traditions, and the recurring notion of gods who walk among mortals. Sitchin's reinterpretation transforms ancient myth into lost science, recasting temples as laboratories, angels as geneticists, and creation itself as an act of bioengineering. If his ideas contain even a fragment of truth, the implications are profound. The King List would no longer be a mythic chronology, but a record of an extraterrestrial administration that once governed Earth. The traces of this epoch, he suggested, might survive not in monuments or machines, but in humanity itself. Our genetic code could carry the faint imprint of that ancient experiment. The enduring human obsession with royal blood, with divine ancestry and chosen lineages, might be a cultural echo of this forgotten legacy, a subconscious remembrance that long ago a spark from another world was woven into our own. Throughout history, the world's royal families have insisted that their right to rule was not merely political, but divine. The pharaohs of Egypt traced their lineage to the sun god Ra. The emperors of Japan claimed descent from the celestial goddess Amaterasu. Across medieval Europe, monarchs proclaimed themselves chosen by God, inheritors of a sacred bloodline. Even the phrase blue blood, long used to describe nobility, may hold echoes of a deeper and far older mystery. Mainstream historians explain it as a metaphor, a reference to the pale skin of European aristocrats whose visible veins appeared bluish. Yet, alternative researchers propose that the term could be the fossil of an ancient biological truth. In Mesopotamian and Vedic traditions, the blood of the gods was sometimes described as being of a different hue, blue or greenish blue, suggesting a chemistry unlike our own. They point to the idea that the Anunnaki's blood, unlike human blood, was not iron-based, which turns red in contact with oxygen, but copper-based, similar to the hemocyanin found in certain earth species like octopuses and horseshoe crabs. Copper-rich blood appears blue when oxygenated, if these beings were indeed our progenitors. Could the enduring myth of blue blood be a dim echo of the time when rulers were literally of another biology, carrying a genetic inheritance distinct from ordinary humans? The speculation grows stranger when we turn to the realm of modern genetics. One of the most puzzling anomalies in human biology is the Rh-negative blood type. Around 15% of the global population lacks the rhesus factor, a protein present in the red blood cells of the other 85%. From an evolutionary standpoint, this trait is perplexing. It confers no known survival advantage and can even cause life-threatening complications during pregnancy if an Rh-negative mother carries an Rh-positive child. Conventional science views it as a random mutation, but fringe theorists see it differently. They argue that this rare blood type might be a biological relic, a trace of an ancient non-human lineage. The evidence they cite is geographic. The world's highest concentration of Rh-negative individuals occurs among the Basque people of northern Spain and southern France, a population long noted for its unique language and distinct genetic profile. Could they represent a more direct continuation of the hybrid bloodline described in Sumerian lore, descendants of humanity's first genetic architects? While such claims remain speculative, they reveal how the Sumerian King List and its account of divine or extraterrestrial rulers continues to shape questions about who and what we truly are. Beyond biology, the legacy of kingship seems to extend into the structure of human society itself. According to the King List, kingship was lowered from heaven, establishing the first and most fundamental institution. From that moment forward, civilization was organized in a top-down hierarchy. A single ruler at the summit, authority radiating downward through priests, governors, and laborers. This model became the blueprint for nearly every complex society that followed, from Mesopotamian empires to modern nation-states. Was this vertical order a natural outcome of human cooperation? Or was it simply the system we inherited? The command structure of our ancient overseers replicated across millennia. Perhaps monarchy, empire, and authoritarian rule are not the inventions of human ambition, but the echo of a design imposed upon us in prehistory. Some modern conspiracy narratives extend this idea further, suggesting that the Anunnaki never truly departed. Instead, they shifted from open dominion to hidden control. According to this theory, the descendants of the original hybrid bloodlines evolved into a global elite, interconnected families who continue to steer political, economic, and cultural systems from behind the scenes. Presidents, monarchs, and corporate leaders become merely the visible administrators of a hierarchy rooted in the same framework that began in Eridu hundreds of millennia ago. To believers, history itself is the story of a carefully managed inheritance, a civilization guided by unseen hands, its progress and crises orchestrated toward some inscrutable goal. The influence may reach even deeper into the spiritual core of human experience. The Sumerian King List describes a time when the divine was not abstract, but physically present, when gods walked the earth as rulers. The flood severed that direct relationship, leaving humanity with an aching sense of loss. Perhaps this rupture is the true origin of religion. Our longing for God, our desire to reconnect with the heavens, may not be a psychological construct, but an inherited memory of that broken bond. Prayer, ritual, and mysticism could all be attempts, subconscious or deliberate, to reopen channels of communication that were closed when the gods withdrew. Every prophet, sage, and visionary might be, unknowingly, trying to recover what was once tangible. The knowledge carried by beings like Enmen-Dur-Ana, who ascended to the heavens and returned with divine wisdom. In this light, humanity's spiritual quest becomes an act of remembrance, a search for a lost inheritance. Whether through the lens of genetics, governance, or faith, the Sumerian King List challenges our self-image as an autonomous species. It whispers a disquieting possibility that we are a civilization with amnesia. We have forgotten who built us, who ruled us, and why they left. We tell ourselves we are the authors of our destiny, the products of chance and evolution. Yet in the quiet halls of the Ashmolean Museum, a small clay prism still bears witness to another version of our story, one that begins not with man, but with the gods who made him. It suggests that we may not be a naturally evolved species at all, but an engineered one, living within an inherited system of hierarchy and governance, still shadowed by the memory of our long-lived, non-human progenitors. If the legacy of the Anunnaki is real, it is not confined to tablets or temples. It is embedded in our cells, mirrored in our politics, and echoed in our faith. It is, as Sitchin described, the ghost in the human machine, from a small clay prism resting quietly in the Ashmolean Museum. The trail leads outward, to the edges of the solar system, to the origin of civilization, and to the genetic code written within us. The Sumerian King List stands as both historical document and enigma, a text that bridges the verifiable and the impossible. It names Gilgamesh, whose existence is archaeologically confirmed, beside Alulem, whose reign of 28,800 years defies comprehension. It is an artifact that straddles myth and history so effortlessly that it forces us to confront a disquieting question. What exactly are we looking at? Is this a chronicle of gods, a genealogy of men, or a record of something that transcends both? There is no easy answer, only a spectrum of interpretations, each unsettling in its own way. The first and most conventional explanation is that the King List is a political creation. According to academic historians, it was likely compiled around 2100 BCE by a ruler of Sumer who sought to legitimize his reign. By tracing his authority through an unbroken chain of kings back to the divine origins of time, he could claim his right to rule as part of heaven's design. In this reading, the pre-flood monarchs are not historical figures, but archetypes, mythological placeholders representing divine order. Their vast reigns, expressed in the Sumerians' base 60 mathematics, are not meant to be chronological years, but symbols of completeness and cosmic harmony. The flood itself serves as a narrative divide, separating the sacred age of gods from the historical age of men. It is a clean, rational explanation, requiring no upheaval of accepted history. Yet it feels incomplete. It does not account for the mathematical precision of the numbers, or the seamless narrative bridge from mythical rulers to confirmed historical kings. Nor does it explain why nearly every major civilization, from Egypt to Mesoamerica, tells the same story of divine monarchs, a cataclysmic flood, and a reborn world. Dismissing the text as mere propaganda risks ignoring something far deeper, the universal pattern that pulses beneath it. The second possibility reframes the King List as misunderstood history. Perhaps the antediluvian kings were not individuals at all, but dynasties, entire ruling houses whose reigns spanned thousands of years collectively. In this model, Alulim would not refer to a single man, but to a lineage that preserved the same name and title through countless generations. This theory resolves the problem of longevity, but collides with other details. Figures like Dumuzid the shepherd are portrayed as personal, emotive, and unique, hardly the abstract totems of dynastic rule. Another variant proposes that the Sumerian years were not literal solar years, but smaller cycles, months, seasons, or ritual calendars. Yet when recalculated, the numbers collapse, destroying the symmetry of the SAR, the 3,600-year unit that forms the mathematical backbone of the text. The elegance of the structure vanishes, leaving only numerical chaos. For all its reasonableness, this theory explains less than it obscures. The third interpretation is the most radical, the one that refuses metaphor entirely. In this view, the King List is literal history, a concise administrative record of an age when Earth was under the direct governance of a technologically and biologically advanced species. The lifespans of tens of thousands of years are not symbolic. They reflect the natural biology of the Anunnaki. Kingship descending from heaven refers to the moment their command structure was established on Earth. Humanity, in this scenario, was a genetically engineered labor force created to serve their purposes. The flood was either a planetary disaster caused by orbital mechanics or a deliberate act of control, a reset button on a project that had spiraled beyond its creator's expectations. If this interpretation holds any truth, the Weld Blundell prism may be the most important artifact ever found, the first written testimony of contact between humanity and an extraterrestrial civilization. It would mean that the roots of our species, our systems of power, and our religions all trace back to that original intervention. It answers almost every anomaly, from sudden technological leaps to universal myths of divine rulers. But it demands a faith in translations and astronomical assumptions that mainstream science has never accepted. In the end, the Sumerian King List serves as a cosmic Rorschach test. What we see in its cuneiform lines reveals our own assumptions about the past and about ourselves. Some see royal propaganda, an ancient attempt to impose order on chaos. Others see a distorted record of real prehistoric dynasties encoded in myth. And still others perceive a literal account of our makers, an alien legacy written in clay. The prism itself offers no commentary, no interpretation. It simply exists, small and silent, presenting its impossible data with bureaucratic calm. Perhaps that is its most haunting quality. It neither confirms nor denies. It only waits for us to decide what kind of story we are willing to believe about our own beginning. Perhaps the true legacy of the Anunnaki and their 241,200-year reign is not a hidden bloodline or a secret empire, but a question, one pressed into a piece of clay 4 millennia ago. It is the oldest question humanity has ever asked. Are you certain you know the whole story? The prism whispers this challenge across 40 centuries, daring us to admit that our scientific timeline may be only a fragment of a much vaster history. It murmurs of forgotten epochs, ages before our age, worlds before our world, and of a time when the line dividing God and man was thin enough to cross. The 8 rulers named in its text, Alulim, Alalgar, Enmenluana, Enmengalana, Dumuzid, Ensipadzidana, Enmendurana, and Ubaratutu, may have vanished into dust along with their cities, but their story endures. It has outlived floods, empires, and civilizations, surviving in the baked clay of a single object that refuses to be silent. What it preserves is more than mythology. It is an inheritance of awe. The Sumerian King List is not just an archaeological curiosity. It is a key, one that unlocks a concealed chamber within the human imagination. Behind its cuneiform symbols lies a vision of a world that does not fit within our comfortable chronology. A world where time moved differently, where kings were beings of immense longevity, and where the birth of civilization was tied to a celestial gift. The prism offers no certainty. Instead, it leaves us standing on the edge of understanding, confronted by the haunting possibility that the myths we dismissed as fables may be fragments of truth. Its numbers, so precise, and its transitions, so seamless, seem to hint at an intelligence that recorded more than stories. It recorded data. The tale it tells of a 241,000-year dominion of gods, a cataclysmic flood, and the rebirth of mortal humanity reverberates across time. It reappears in scripture, in legend, and perhaps, as some suggest, in the hidden architecture of our DNA. The flood becomes not merely an act of divine wrath, but the dividing line between two realities, one immortal, one fragile. We are the children of the second world, born into forgetfulness, haunted by echoes of the first. Whether one views the Anunnaki as literal extraterrestrial visitors, as mythic metaphors for cosmic powers, or as symbolic figures of a lost golden age, their story forces a recalibration of self. It offers the humbling idea that humanity may not be the author of its own genesis, but the custodian of a civilization founded by others. Our technologies, hierarchies, and faiths all inherited from a moment when the heavens touched the earth. The small clay prism, resting quietly in the Ashmolean Museum, is not simply an artifact of the past. It is a message written for the future, a reminder that history is not a closed book, but a puzzle still being assembled. Each fragment, each myth, each anomaly invites us to look again, to read the old stories with unclouded eyes. For in those ancient lines of wedge-shaped writing lies a truth too vast for certainty, but too persistent for denial. It suggests that humanity may suffer from collective amnesia, that our origin story is incomplete, and that somewhere, buried beneath the layers of time, is a chapter that redefines what it means to be human. The mystery of the Sumerian King List is therefore not about clay or kings at all. It is about consciousness. It challenges us to question the boundaries of knowledge, to see myth not as superstition, but as memory, and to acknowledge that the distance between heaven and earth may be smaller than we ever believed. Its 8 names are not mere relics. They are coordinates pointing to a forgotten beginning. The prism's silent endurance, its refusal to fade into the dust, feels almost deliberate, as if those who inscribed it intended it to be found when we were finally ready to ask the right questions. Across 4,000 years, it has waited, carrying its impossible numbers and its unanswerable challenge. And now, as we read its words under electric light instead of torch flame, it speaks again. It tells us that truth and myth are not opposites, but reflections of the same mystery, and that the greatest discoveries will not be made by digging deeper into the ground, but by looking anew at the stories we already possess. The prism's message is as clear as it is unsettling. History is not finished, and neither are we.